My friend and fellow author Blair Lynn remembers the moment the floor dropped out beneath her. What followed were panic attacks, ER visits, and waves of anxiety so intense they left her trembling, breathless, and afraid she might die. As a Christian, she knew she should cast her cares on God, but she didn't know how. In the depths of fear and discouragement, simple answers and spiritual cliches fell flat. There was no quick fix, no bypassing the valley. In Made to Tremble, Blair shares how she learned to walk with God through her anxiety, not around it. With scripture, story, and raw honesty, she shows what it means to embrace our weakness, not as failure, but as the place where God meets us most tenderly. This is a book for anyone who feels overwhelmed, afraid, or unsure if faith can hold in the storm. Through Blair's story, discover the peace of God and a deeper awe of the God of peace. Get your copy at madetotremble.com. The Sing hymnal, from award-winning hymn writers Keith and Kristen Getty, is a rich collection of classic and contemporary hymns created to deepen worship, foster unity in the church, and proclaim the hope that we have in Christ. Alongside beloved hymns, you'll also find psalms paired with songs, liturgical readings, and helpful indices, making this hymnal a lasting resource for families and congregations alike. Pick up your copy wherever books are sold, or get 30% off at crossway.org/gettyhymnal with a free Crossway Plus account. You guys are listening to the Confronting Christianity podcast, and I'm already laughing because I'm here with my friend Sam Chan, who just said, "I'm at my best when I wing it," which is something that may or may not have been said of me on certain occasions. Sam, I'm going to have you introduce yourself to our listeners in a second, but first I want to tell a little story. So Sam and I are both part of a group called the Keller Center Fellows. So if anybody's heard of Tim Keller, who was formerly a pastor and speaker and writer based in New York City, had some really helpful things to say. And Sam and I are sort of in a little group springing out of his work and a group of people who are really interested in talking about Jesus in relation to a lot of questions. And the first time this group got together, Sam was giving a presentation on talking about Jesus, and my friend Rachel Gilson, who listeners, a friend of the show, as other podcasts might say, leant over to me and she said, "That's your soul in an Asian Australian man's body." Because Sam and I are in many ways very much not the same person, but in some ways have very similar DNA. So Sam, I'm going to have you tell us a little bit about yourself so listeners get a sense of who you are before we jump into our very interesting question of the day.
All right, thanks, Rebecca. So a bit more about me. As you can see, I'm Asian and Australian, so born in Hong Kong, but spent most of my life growing up in Australia. I did PhD studies in Chicago as well, so that I'm sort of American as well, lived there for about 5 years. And I trained as a medical doctor in Australia, so I still work part-time as a medical doctor. And I do a bit of time in Christian ministry. I work with City Bible Forum, where I talk to workers in the workplace and I give them truths about Jesus from the Bible. I do what's called surgical assist work as a doctor in Australia. And you're thinking, what is a surgical assistant? Well, when you go for an operation, you get 3 bills from the doctors. First bill is from the surgeon, and you think, fair enough, they did the operating. Second bill is from the anesthesiologist. Fair enough, they kept me alive. So who is this bozo sending me a third bill? That is me, the surgical assistant. So my most important job is to say hi to you just before the operation, just before you fall asleep. And I say, "Hi, my name is Sam, and you'll be getting a bill from me in 2 weeks' time." And that's the last thing you hear as you fall asleep. So my job is to hold your leg while they operate on you. Just like a mechanic might need someone to hold the hood of the car up, I hold the leg, and I have the most important job. Nurses actually look at me and they wonder, how does that take 10 years of medical school to do that? Like, they look at the surgeon, I can see how that takes 10 years of medical school. How does that take 10 years of medical school? Well, I've got the most important job because, as doctors, we're so worried we're going to operate on the wrong side. We're forever asking you at every checkpoint, which side, which side, which side. And you're saying this side, this leg, this side. And then they put you to sleep. And it all comes down to which leg I pick up first. And I wasn't there for any of those conversations. And, it's a 50-50. We get it right half the time. And if we do the wrong side, we throw in the other side for free. So it's a win-win.
Amazing. I had a minor operation a few years ago, and they drew on me in like a Sharpie pen to say this side. Like, is that something that people do as well as asking?
That is what they do. And I always say we should draw on the opposite side and say not this side, because I think that's what I want. The red flag, not the green light.
It's like those signs sometimes when I'm driving in America, there'll be a sign that just says wrong way. It's like, don't drive up this. You are absolutely in the wrong direction. Well, funnily enough, Sam, this is a nice segue into what I want to talk with you about today, because a lot of people in our culture, and when I say our culture, I mean you're living on the other side of the world from where I'm currently located, which is in the Eastern United States, and from where I come from as well, which is the United Kingdom. Because I'm not American, a lot of Americans hear my accent and they think, oh, are you from Australia? And I say, no, you're not even close. Like, you could not be further from the truth of where I'm from. But a lot of people in all of these different cultural zones have a deep belief that our primary job, or like one of our biggest jobs as human beings, is to be true to ourselves. So, maybe you grew up dreaming of being a doctor or being a leg holder or being, the guy who reads the Sharpie mark that says this side. And that your mission then is not to do, what your parents expected of you or what society expects of you or whatever. Your mission in life is to fulfill that dream, to live your most authentic life, to be true to yourself, and you shouldn't let anything stand in the way of that. And I'm curious, as you reflect on that, as somebody who is a follower of Jesus, do you think it's true, number one, that we should be trying to live our most authentic selves? And if so, why? If not, why not?
Oh, I love it. In fact, you've just got me on where I've been speaking at my own church on a whole series of, storylines that we live by. And the pastor and I actually said, what are we going to speak on this year to kick off 2025? And we thought, well, we all have a storyline. And the way to expose that storyline is, let's say tragically, a friend of ours dies, maybe very young through an accident, maybe a car accident, a water skiing accident. At the funeral, we all catch ourselves saying these little truisms like, it just goes to show blank. So how would we fill in that blank? And I think 90% of the time we say, well, it just goes to show you've got to be true to yourself. So it's okay. You died doing what you love. You died doing what makes you happy. You just have to be true to yourself. And I think it's a great storyline, and there's some truth and there's some goodness and there's some beauty to it. I tell the story that if there was a fire in my house right now and I could only save one thing, it would not be my birth certificate. It would not be my wedding certificate. It would be a trophy I got for playing rugby for my university, because that trophy defines and validates who I am, because it shows I'm the son of Asian immigrants who grew up in Australia, and my Asian parents would have loved me to grow up playing the violin and doing a safe sport like badminton or table tennis. Instead, I went against their dreams and I had the courage to be true to myself. I chose a contact sport and I played it and it made me happy. And it's a narrative to almost every movie that we have, even the latest movie, Wicked. In the end, the witch, she was true to herself. She had the courage to be who she was and not who other people told her to be. So it's a great storyline, but it can only get us so far, because the problem with being true to ourselves is, well, who is myself? Like every 5 years, my personality changes. I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago. I'm not the same person I was at university. I'm not the same person I was when I was in high school. So myself keeps changing. Another thing is I once did a fun run through Sydney. It was only about a 10-mile fun run. And part of me wanted it to stop. And part of me wanted to keep on going. So If I stopped, I would have been true to myself. If I kept on going, I would have been true to myself as well. And in the end, I kept running because there was 40,000 people running and I could not stop. I had to keep on going. And so was I true to myself or was I just doing what the crowd was forcing me to do? So it's not obvious whether we're true to ourselves. And Tim Keller puts it, sorry if I'm going on and on a bit, but Tim Keller puts it this way. Let's say you were born a Viking and part of you likes to kill, maim and murder. But part of you, let's say you want to play ping pong, like a billion Asians can't be wrong. It's a safe, non-contact sport. If you were born 1,000 years ago and you lived in Norway, you would choose to suppress the table tennis playing side of you and you'd embrace the side of you that wants to kill, maim and murder. And you'd be a hero because you would have saved your village and you'd be promoted as a hero. You would go to all the schools as an example to the children of how to be true to yourself and kill, maim and murder. But let's say it's the 21st century and you grow up in a suburb like Sydney, you would suppress the kill, maim, murder side of yourself and play table tennis. And again, you'd be a hero. You go to schools as an example of someone who had the courage to be true to their authentic self. So it's not clear who our self is. And so I was scanning the Atlantic, and there's a writer there called Arthur C. Brooks. He's a happiness expert. He's got podcasts on it. He writes on it. And he said, if we ask, am I true to myself? The problem is it's the wrong question. He said it's like asking the question, how can I get healthy eating junk food? Bah, that's the wrong question. Correct question is, what healthy food can I eat? And so if we ask, how can I be true to myself? Bah, wrong question. We should ask instead, what is my true self? What is my design? How have I been designed? And he says, in the end, let's make it long story short, our design is we've been created in the image of God. God is love. We've been designed to love and serve others. And so we are at our most fulfilled when we don't live self-centered, self-absorbed, unfulfilling lives. Instead, we love and serve others. And in the end, we've been created to love, serve, and worship God. Inside all of us is this capacity for awe and wonder. And we will be at our most full and fulfilled when we love and serve others and love and worship God. So I think the being true to yourself thing gets us only so far, but in the end, it collapses on itself. And they say it's one of the reasons why there's so much anxiety and stress now, because we're so self-obsessed with ourselves that we're projects in creation and we get no relief from ourselves and we're never even good enough for ourselves. So that's one of the fallbacks of being true to yourself.
Okay, I love it, Sam. There's a lot to unpick there. So I'm gonna do some picking.
Okay.
So first, you said early on in that you are not the same person you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when you're in college, whatever it is. And I find that really interesting because from my understanding of what some sort of contemporary secular philosophers are saying, and people sort of looking at the human being from a scientific perspective, that statement that you're not the same person you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, is potentially true if we're looking from a kind of non-religious perspective at what human beings are. That there's actually no real way to ground a continuous sense of self. So we have this idea and this sense that, you know, the child that we remember being is the same me as the person that I am now. But as I say, from what I understand of some current thinkers, philosophers and scientists, they're saying, actually, that's just an illusion. That's just a story that we tell ourselves. And in fact, you are not the same person as you were. And some would go so far as to say, even your sense that you are a person, your idea that you are a being who makes decisions and has feelings and desires, like there's an I-ness to you, that is actually just delusion. So I guess my thought when you made that comment was, as a Christian, I do have a basis for saying I'm the same person as I was, in the sense of like there is a continuous me, because the me God made in my mother's womb is the me who went to, you know, high school and university and moved to America with my husband from Oklahoma and did all the things that I'm doing here. It's still the same me, even though there have been meaningful changes in, my body and the way that I think about certain things, or the way that the kinds of foods that I eat, like all sorts of changes that have happened over time, but it is still the same me. And I'm curious whether you would say that that's actually a dividing line between a Christian understanding and some of our sort of top secular thinkers at the moment.
Yeah, there is so much to unpack there as well. So at least maybe even philosophically, they talk about the continuity of identity, even the continuity of personhood. So that's what we're tracing. But even then, like at university, if I was true to myself, I would have done some things I would regret having done looking back, like where I am now. And I would wish I had not been so true to my university self. So even there, being true to my university self has its fallbacks, because now I, wish I hadn't been so selfish, self-absorbed. And being true to yourself lets you get away, well, let's call it what it is, a lot of selfish behavior. When you could have helped a stranger, when you ought to have given a friend a lift. Being true to yourself could have been just staying in your apartment watching Netflix. And so even there, we seem to judge what are good decisions, bad decisions, wise decisions, unwise decisions. So even there, I would say there's a transcendent reference point for judging what is good, how should I be true to myself? So that's why I was breaking it down with in the fun run. In the end, the crowd forced me to keep on running. I really wasn't that true to myself. I'll throw it back to you because there's so many strands there I could interact with.
What do you do when it feels like your spiritual life is crumbling? When trusted leaders fail, doubts rise, grief hits, and you don't know what to believe in anymore? In her new book, Someone to Believe In, Embracing the Saviour Who Stays the Same When Everything Else Changes, author and Bible teacher Courtney Reisig helps us to see Jesus' unshakable character. If you're not sure whether you believe in Jesus yet, or if your faith feels unsteady in the face of grieving, burnout, or disillusionment, this book invites you to encounter Jesus as the one who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Get your copy of Someone to Believe In today at someonetobelievein.com. Yeah, and so I'm thinking, even building on that then, one of the, I guess a couple of the Christian distinctives that come into this are, number one, that the Bible's diagnosis of your heart and mind, like our sort of deepest selves in our natural state, as it were, as we rock along through life, is far worse than we tend to realize. So there's a moment, for example, when Jesus is being challenged by some of the religious leaders of his day because his disciples aren't following some of the rules that were typical of that particular group of Jews at the time, and they weren't washing their hands ceremonially before they were eating. And Jesus pushes back really hard on this, and he ends up saying, actually, what makes you unclean? So there was a sort of big concern that Jews of Jesus' day would have had about being clean or unclean in a sort of ceremonial sense, and it was a religious duty to make sure that you were clean and not unclean in certain context. And Jesus says, listen, what makes you unclean isn't the food that you put into your body, it's actually what comes out of your heart. And then he says, out of men's and by extension women's hearts come all sorts of evil things. So he cites sort of sexual immorality and murder and slander and like all this bad stuff that, according to Jesus, if we look deep in our hearts, we shouldn't expect to find just like true, good and beautiful things, as you put it earlier. But that we need to be pretty realistic about the fact that we'll find a lot of bad stuff coming out of our hearts. So as a starting point, if I'm going to be true to myself, I may end up being a pretty morally ugly version of what I might be. And that's a problem that I have, it's a problem you have, that's a problem that everybody listening to this podcast has. It's not that, well, there are some people who have basically good hearts and other people who have basically bad hearts. And, hopefully we can all grow and improve over time. It's actually, no, all of us have really, really bad hearts to where we don't need a guru or a moral example or just like a good teacher. We actually need a radical intervention. And then so that I guess that's part of the bad news of Christianity. The good news then is that radical intervention has come, that Jesus has come to die for our sin, as the Bible would put it, so that he takes that badness on himself and in exchange gives us a new identity, actually makes us a new creation, is one of the ways that the New Testament puts it. So I'm just sort of reflecting again on like, am I the same person that I was 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago? I'm someone who I don't remember a time when I wasn't following Jesus. So I have less of a kind of clear before and after sort of snapshot of like my old self and my new self. Our mutual friend Rachel Gilson, who became a Christian when she was 19, she very clearly sort of has a before and after snapshot in her mind of like this was her pre-following Jesus self, this was her post-following Jesus self. And it's not that kind of miraculously suddenly when you start following Jesus, all the desires of your heart are suddenly good, for sure. But there is a sense in which if we've trusted in Jesus, we are given a new identity. So that what is most true now of you and of me as followers of Jesus, despite the sin that still kind of churns around in our hearts and comes out in our actions in many ways, what's most true of us is that we are in Christ, as the New Testament puts it, that we actually kind of share in Jesus's righteousness. And so I guess that's an encouraging thought from a Christian perspective when we're kind of conscious, as hopefully we are, of all the ways in which we are continuing to struggle with sin, that there's a true self that is much better than how we kind of look right now, and that we have the opportunity to sort of live into that true self, even though it doesn't mean following our desires all the time. Like it's not sort of giving our hearts the sort of driver's seat in our lives, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so much we could interact with there. So what I like is to look at in the Bible where Jesus tells that story of the rich man and Lazarus. And if we're not familiar with that story, Jesus says there was a rich man who lived in luxury. He ate well, he dressed well, but outside of his gates was a poor man called Lazarus who had to beg and was so hungry he wished he could eat the food, the scraps that was falling from the rich man's tables. And he was so sick that dogs would lick his sores. And then when they die, there's a reversal of fortune. Lazarus finds himself in heaven. The rich man finds himself alone in Hades. And what I point out is this man was true to himself. He was so self-absorbed. And in the end, God hands him over to his wishes. He spends eternity in isolation, true to himself, alone, and continues to be self-absorbed. And then what's fascinating is in the story Jesus tells, Lazarus has a name. He's actually got more of an identity. He's more of a true human than the rich man. And we don't know why, but presumably maybe he was a person who loved and worshipped God. He loved and served other people. So the rich man who is true to himself becomes very one-dimensional, very thin, a thin way to live as a human. He has no identity, no name, whereas Lazarus has a name. And then the book of Luke has this climactic story where another rich man called Lazarus welcomes Jesus with joy into his home and into his heart. And so he's truly true to his true image that God has given him because he loves and worships Jesus. And then he says, I am going to give generously and pay back money I owe to the poor. So now he's loving and serving other people. So we get an image of once we have Jesus in us, that in Jesus idea, we get a truer identity. And being true to that identity, we get more joy, more fulfillment, and more of an identity. So it's quite a reversal of fortune that Jesus gives us.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we will find if we do focus on being true to ourselves is a sense of smallness, actually. Like even if we have great ambitions, which I feel like, we've sort of told the generation of kids, you can be anything you want to be, which just frankly isn't true. I could not have been a gymnast. I'm just like too tall. I'm not wildly tall, but I'm like, I don't know, 5'7.5", 5'8". That's way too tall to be a professional gymnast. So I could have set my heart on that all I liked and that wasn't going to happen. You could have dreamt of being a basketball player. You're way too short to be a basketball player. Like, we could play this tape out in whatever direction. Like I could have wished or dreamt that I was going to be an opera singer. Like I sing okay, but not even close to how well you need to sing for that. Like however hard I tried, it wasn't going to happen. And so we've told a generation of kids, at least in the West, like you can live your dream, whatever it is, and be true to yourself. And don't let anybody tell you no. Like don't let anybody tell you, Sam, you're too short to be a professional basketball player. Or like, Rebecca, you're too tall to be a gymnast. And like maybe if we just believed a little bit harder, we could have done that. And it's actually, it's a cruel thing to say to people because it's ultimately not true. We could have wasted our lives desperately trying to be something that we just physically were not cut out to be. And it's also just it's ultimately very, very limiting because there is not enough of me to create a total destiny for myself. Like, actually, I'm not big enough for that. I'm designed, as you were mentioning earlier, I'm designed to be in relationship with the creator God of all the universe who made the stars. I mean, people sometimes say, oh, look, the discoveries of modern science have shown us quite how small the Earth is in the context of the solar system, when the solar system's only a tiny little dot in the context of this massive galaxy, and who knows how many galaxies there are. How can you Christians possibly say that God, so much revolves around you, I guess, that God would have sent his son to die for teeny tiny little ants crawling around on this insignificant planet in this backwater of the solar system in this tiny dot of the galaxy. And I'd want to say, no, actually, that if anything, reminds me of a Christian understanding, which is that the God who made the universe is so much greater than we are, that we are infinitesimal compared to him. And so the fact that he has called us into relationship with himself, the fact that he sent his son to die for us should blow our minds, and is so much more exciting than anything that I could dream up for myself, or any dream I could have had of being a professional gymnast, or you could have had of being a professional basketball player. What if we dreamed of being an everlasting relationship with the creator God of all the universe, who made the galaxies and who made every human being around the planet, and who, our dreams of creativity are only tiny little echoes of his creativity. And our dreams of love are only tiny little echoes of the love that he has within himself and that he is sharing and offering to us, that we're just going to have a miserably small existence if we circle everything around our sort of sense of who we are.
Oh, it's so true, so good. And that reminds me, I've just finished reading the autobiography of David Brooks. David Brooks is a New York Times writer, best-selling author. He wrote a book recently called The Second Mountain, and is sort of describing what we're talking about here. He said you climb the first mountain in life, and in the first mountain, you serve the needs of the ego. It's all about trophies, success, victories, gaining, validation. And then you get to the top of the mountain, you turn because you were true to yourself, and you suddenly realize it's empty. There's nothing there. And that's when you realize, there was a second mountain I should have been climbing. And the second mountain is one where you serve the needs of the soul by giving, sacrifice, and grace and relationship. And then when he discovered that, then he started thinking, we all know that should be true. There's no culture that says, no, you've got that wrong. It's all about the ego. It's not about the soul. It's about gaining, not giving. It's about victories, not sacrifice. No, every culture knows it's about sacrifice, giving, love, service, grace. So then David Brooks thought, okay, if that's true, that can only be true if there's a God behind the universe who's also a God of love, service, sacrifice, and grace. And that made him journey not just to a belief in God, but into the Christian God, because it's only the Christian God who loves, serves, sacrifices, and gives. And that's why you have that verse in Philippians chapter 2, which says, Jesus Christ, because he was in the image of God, became a human in the form of a servant. It wasn't despite being in the image of God. It was because he was in the image of God. So somehow God, because that's how he's wired, has wired into the universe and even into our souls, that we are at our most true when we give, serve, and worship God.
That's interesting. I haven't read Brooks's autobiography, but I'm curious what he would make of the sort of Greco-Roman Empire's values, because writing a book at the moment where I'm looking at some of the ways in which Christianity changed how Greek and Roman, our Greek and Roman forebears thought about sex in particular. But one of the things that seems sort of pretty clear as you look at ancient history is that the ethos of the Roman Empire was very much one of dominion, as historian Tom Holland puts it, a kind of, there was a strong kind of might is right view, and that building up your own empire, your own ego, your own sort of status was seen as pretty paramount. Now, there would be certain context in which it would be kind of glorious to fight in battle and to sort of sacrifice it in that sense. But your ultimate aim, if you're fighting a battle, is to kill the other person rather than to kind of die yourself. And so I'm curious, I don't know, I guess I'm curious about that little thread of what you were saying there about whether it's actually true that every society and culture is organized this way. I wonder if it's I mean, it's very evident in Christian ethics. I think there's a kind of range, I guess, in some other belief systems. But maybe David Bricks had more to say on that.
Yeah, so maybe what I meant to say, we all sense it to be true, but there's only one storyline that can give us that foundation for that truth that we sense to be true. And I think David Brooks would agree. He had an early book called Road to Character, and you could sense even there the journey where he was discovering grace in the character. I think it was Augustine. He had a really good write-up of Augustine and grace. So already there, I think that, so when David Brooks wrote that, he was not a Christian, but you could sense the beginning of his journey towards the Christian faith. John Dixon has a book called Humilitas, and it's all about how, we esteem humility and we think a good leader is a humble, serving leader. And John Dixon says that is such a new, novel idea. The Greeks and the Romans would not have thought humility was something to esteem in a leader. That was a very recent Christian innovation.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the crazy claims of the Christian faith that the God of all the universe became a man and chose to, as Jesus himself puts it, he didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. That sort of upside down view of power. The most powerful person who ever lived died the most humiliating and excruciating death ever died in order to rescue people like us whose hearts, again, according to Jesus, are not good and true and beautiful. It's not like Jesus thought, oh, look at those amazing human beings. Clearly they deserve to live with me forever, and I'm just gonna, make it happen for them. It's more actually, the New Testament describes us as like enemies of God. And Jesus coming to die for the unrighteous, for the bad people. And that's in some ways startling, and in other ways quite encouraging, because it means that you and I don't have to look into our hearts and think, oh, probably there's only good stuff there, and if there's stuff that isn't good, then that's because of society or culture or my upbringing or trauma that I went through or whatever. It's come from outside me. That no, we can have a pretty clear-eyed view of what our hearts are like, and still know that Jesus died for love of us. I was talking with a young woman who became a Christian in our church just a little bit over a year ago, and I remember her saying in one of our earliest conversations that before she put her trust in Jesus, she really was trying to believe that she was a good person, and she was struggling with the fact that a lot of the kind of thoughts and ideas that came out of her heart were really not good at all. And this culture around her was saying, "Oh no, you're definitely a good person. So if you look inside, what you'll find is true and good and beautiful." She was like, "Oh, I'm not. That's not what I'm finding. Like, what do I do with that?" And she said one of the reliefs of becoming a Christian was realizing, "Oh no, I'm actually not in and of myself a good person, and so I shouldn't be surprised to find all these sort of bad thoughts and desires coming out of my heart. I'm the kind of person Jesus died for. In other words, a sinner, and that's okay. Like, our sin is not okay, but we can have a framework for understanding what's coming out of our hearts and not despairing." Because the one person who knows you and me better than we know ourselves and sees all our thoughts and desires and hypocrisy and lust and whatever it is, that's the same person who came to die for us. I think that's sort of the beauty at the center of the Christian faith and the relief of it. Because all of us, I mean, ultimately, I think wherever we come from, whether you're in Australia or in Hong Kong or in London or in Boston, where I am, all of us want to be fully known and completely loved. And only Jesus can do those two things. I think we spend probably a lot of our lives like trying to be loved by those around us and sort of only showing them the pieces of us that might make them want to love us and kind of carefully hiding the pieces that really wouldn't. And we just don't have to have any of that pretense with Jesus, because he sees it all, and he's the one who loved us kind of literally to death and back. Sam, last question for you. I always like to ask people, like, how did you become a Christian, or why do you find Jesus compelling today? Which other of those two questions you prefer to answer?
Oh, I love it. So I grew up with Christian parents, and of course that helps you to grow up as a Christian, because from very early on, you know about Jesus, you know how what he's done for us, the good news of Jesus coming, dying on the cross, rising from the dead, the forgiveness of sins, the new birth, the new heart, the adoption as a child of God. So you know all of that. But at the same time, you sort of don't want to believe all of that, because you have the whole struggle as a immigrant kid growing up in a Western country. So you're trying to reject as much of your parents' identity as possible because you're awkward being an Asian. And so you sort of don't want to believe what they believe. So I think I had a much stronger bent on, I got to know if this is true. So I think that sent me on a lot of investigating on, could I trust the reliability of the Bible, the evidence for Jesus, that sort of stuff. But there were some light bulb moments. I think one was when I was 16, when a chaplain at our school got us to read the book of Romans. And I think for the first time, I understood the gospel clearly in all its fullness, that because Jesus was perfect, I didn't have to pretend to be perfect anymore. So I think at 16, that made sense. And just the freedom that comes from that. Everything you're describing where, if we're told we're perfect and we don't feel like we're perfect, then there's this real struggle and anxiety and stress of self-improvement. So there's this liberation, just knowing if Jesus is perfect, I don't have to pretend to be perfect, but he loves me just the way I am, but he loves me too much to leave me the way I am. So he makes me more and more like Jesus every day. Then at about 28, another light bulb moment came on where I had to decide whether I wanted to stay in full-time medicine or give up full-time medicine and go into a Christian ministry where I could tell others about Jesus. Now, I could have served Jesus as a doctor, and many people do, but it just would not have allowed me the freedom to go and speak about Jesus because of the time commitments. So then, being a full-time doctor, that's every Asian immigrant's dream, and people want to talk to you at parties. They want to show you their rash. They want your opinion. Bank managers love talking to doctors. They want to throw all their money at you. You go into full-time ministry, no one wants to talk to you at parties. Bank managers don't want to give you their money. And so it made me think, okay, where is my identity? This is real. This is actually going to cost me. I have to really, really believe this. Did Jesus really rise from the dead? Is this where my identity is secure? So that was a light bulb moment. And maybe the final one was a few years ago, my mother died and I had to speak at the funeral. And I remember telling my boys, you raise your children for one reason only. So they speak at your funeral. Today's my turn. Watch what I do. One day it's going to be your turn. And I remember seeing my mother's dead body in the open coffin. And that's when you think, do I really believe this? Is my mother really going to rise from the dead? And then I thought, well, you know what? I'm looking in front of me at a dead body. It's atoms and molecules. It's got the same chemical composition as the coffee grounds you throw away in the bin or down the sink or in the compost heap. So this body is no different from coffee grounds you throw in the bin. But somehow when my mother was alive, there was life in there that coffee grounds don't have. And you could call it person, spirit, soul. But that's the difference now. That life is gone. I don't know where it is, but it was there, but it's not there anymore. But if life could have come from non-life once, and if this universe came from nothing, the best explanation must be there's a living, powerful God who brought this universe from nothing, who gave life to non-life, personhood from chemicals, and that same God can also raise the dead then. It's no big thing for him to do it. If he did it once, he can do it again. And then if he did it once, he can easily raise Jesus from the dead, and he can easily raise my mother from the dead. So I think that was a moment where I thought, you know what? I do believe. This finally makes emotional and rational sense to me, and I can live it and believe in it.
Well, thanks so much, Sam, for chatting. Sam's based in Australia, so he's had to stay up late to have this conversation, and I appreciate your time, brother. For those who are listening, maybe we need to stop asking the question, are we being true to ourselves, and instead find a better source for truth than my heart or your heart. And Jesus, one of the claims he made about himself was he said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. And if that is true, then following Jesus is the way to find the ultimate truth, the truth that is at the center of this universe, this truth that is at the center of your being and my being, if we will turn to Jesus, and we can find him to be true when he tells us that he is the one who will give us truth and show us the way, and ultimately give us life if we've trusted in him, just as he will one day give life back to Sam's mother, and she will be raised to everlasting life with him. So if you want to get in on that deal, stop trying to be true to yourself and instead throw yourself on the mercy of Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life.